Joining us now, Wilbur Ross, the U.S. Commerce Secretary, who's going to give us the latest on our dealings with China and, of course, with Mexico as the NAFTA renegotiations proceed. Secretary Ross, it's great to talk to you. How are you doing today?
Good to be back with you, Laura.
Let's talk about, first of all, this concern about the trade war with China. As far as I can tell, the president's strategy is actually working. And President Xi is even feeling the heat from his own Politburo, I saw the other day, who are complaining about this tumultuous market, in part because of the pressure the tariffs bring onto the usual Chinese market manipulation.
I agree with you, Laura. The purpose of the president's actions is very straightforward. He wants to increase the pain level on China to the point where they will find it less painful to adopt the measures we want than to continue with their practices. That's the purpose of the whole exercise, is eventually to have a more open playing field, get away from the technology transfers that they're forcing on our companies, get away from all of these untoward illegitimate practices that are hurting American workers and American farmers.
Well, I think, again, for a lot of these more traditional Republicans who have been, they cut their teeth on this notion that tariffs are it's a four-letter word. You can never talk about tariffs, Secretary Ross. You can never use tariffs. You just can't do that. Like Joe Scarborough was on television this morning saying, this is not conservative at all. If conservatism is all about tariffs, then that's not it. Let's listen.
It is the antithesis of what conservatism has meant for 70 years, which is a party that says they support small government, fiscal responsibility, free trade, a tough stance against Russian aggression. And now we have Vladimir Putin coming to America.
Whether it's Putin or the tariff issue, these never Trump Republicans just won't let it go. I mean, even if the facts, Secretary Ross, are coming up, pretty rosy for this administration, it's like none of those facts matter. None of them matter at all in the analysis.
Well, free trade is the end result that the president is seeking. He's made that clear at the G7. He's made it clear repeatedly in his public addresses. But the dirty truth is there is no free trade. China and the European Union are highly protectionist countries. They talk free trade, but they practice extreme protectionism in terms of high tariffs and high non-tariff trade barriers. So there's nothing inconsistent between the president's ultimate objectives and traditional Republican objectives. The question is, how do you get there? And any Republican or Democrat or anybody else who thinks that there really is free trade now doesn't know what he's talking about.
What's the latest on our negotiations with Mexico now that we have Obrador as the incoming president? Where does that stand?
Well, things are looking much better. As you know, there was a great concern that the new administration in Mexico might be quite anti-American, might be quite reluctant to negotiate. Exactly the reverse is what's happening. The new president almost immediately picked his trade team as having them work in concert with the former president's trade team, and has made clear they're satisfied with all the negotiations that have been conducted thus far and are fully engaging in the resolution of the last few items. Those are important items, but they're relatively small in number, and it seems fairly clear from the fact that the new president in Mexico is doing this even before he's inaugurated on December 1st. That augurs well for the speed of the talks. So I'm optimistic that sometime in coming weeks we have a very good chance to have a deal with Mexico.
Oh, that would. What is that going to do to the U.S. economy?
Well, we're not going to make a deal if it isn't beneficial to the U.S. economy. So it goes without saying that unless it's a market improvement from NAFTA 1.0 to NAFTA 2.0, President won't do it.
We're talking to Wilbur Ross, the president's commerce secretary. Secretary Ross, I've been watching some of the various financial analysts over the last week or so, and a lot of them are, of course, the economy is very strong, its fundamentals seem great, but then there are the others who say this is built on a house of cards, we have such a high debt in this country, our spending is still too high, that this is basically only a matter of time before it all comes tumbling down, that without real, reform to entitlements, those types of big issues that we still haven't tackled as a people and as a government, that this can only go so far. What would your reaction to that be?
Well, in terms of the economic outlook for the rest of this year and into 2019, it's very hard for me to see any big flaws developing. If interest rates got too high too soon, that could become a problem, but it doesn't feel like that is what will happen. Other than that, these are mostly the same people who used to say, well, the economy really can't grow more than 2%. They were wrong about that. Then they said the president will never get his tax cuts through. They were wrong about that. Then when the tax cuts went through, they said they'll only benefit the elites. Well, that's not true either. And the working guy who got a $1,000 bonus, as some 6 million Americans did, specifically because of the tax cuts from their employers, the guy who just got that and sees lower withholding and therefore more net pay in the weekly or monthly paycheck, that guy is hard to fool. That guy knows what's really happening, and that's why consumer confidence is so strong. It's why consumer spending is so strong. It's why people are starting to come back into the workforce. Those are dynamics that are not suddenly going to change, and I think they will be reinforced by the inevitable slight delay between the enactment of the 100% write-off of property and equipment. There's a little delay between when that was enacted and when corporations can order the new capital goods. Yeah. So I think capital goods will become another stimulus. Yeah, and same naysayers say, well, there was a temporary increase in American exports, and that's what boosted so much the economy in the June quarter. What they fail to note is there was a reduction in inventory, which almost dollar for dollar offset the export figure. So all they're giving is part of a story because their ideology doesn't have room for the tremendous economic success that the president's programs are producing.
Wilbur Ross speaks in full paragraphs. I love it. Secretary Ross, I love it. Anyone who can come on my show and say it augurs well for the future. I mean, I haven't heard augurs well on my show for a long time. So I love it. We were talking about the lack of attention to detail and language and dress earlier, and just why this is infecting American culture today. And so it's just so great to hear someone who can explain something without an or an awe. Isn't that sad that that's my benchmark now, Secretary Ross? That's just, that happens to be where I am. Let's just close out with this comment from Ben Rhodes, who, of course, used to work in the Obama administration. He said they had a different way of countering China, and basically that the Trump team ruined it. Let's listen.
We wanted to open up some of the biggest markets in Asia, but that was a part of getting tough on China. The way to go into that fight is to build your own team and isolate the Chinese. So what we did is we said, okay, we're going to organize the rest of Asia into a trade agreement with us, so that then when we go into the fight with China, we're in a much stronger position. The danger here is Trump is picking trade fights with our allies at the same time that he's doing with China.
Yeah, well, he's obviously touting the TPP, which, of course, the president rejected.
Well, the TPP was rejected because it was not a good deal for the United States. It was not rejected because we lost any interest in Asia. In fact, the president's strategy is much broader. It encompasses India as well, and that's why we call it an Indo-Pacific strategy. But as to the notion that the Obama administration made any progress against China, that's just silly. The truth is, our allies are rallying behind the president on combating China. Since December of 2017, there have been 3 separate trilateral statements issued by the United States, Europe, and Japan, all singing the same tune about the problems with what China is doing. I don't remember any trilateral statements supporting the U.S. position previous to this president. He is really making progress.
Well, again,
so this whole idea that you have to roll over and play dead, and that somehow is the way to get someone to modify their behavior, is just silly.
And finally, Secretary Ross, the Fed, you mentioned them earlier, of course, Federal Reserve. The interest rates are steady, but it looks like we're going to see increases to come. New York Times is a big piece about that, saying the Federal Reserve is defying Trump, and that the president has expressed his irritation, to put it mildly, about the Federal Reserve stepping in and hiking interest rates. Where does the president stand on that today? And is that healthy for him to be publicly in a feud with the Fed?
Well, I don't know that he's publicly in a feud with the Fed. The president is certainly entitled to his own opinion as to what various aspects of the economy can do, should do, and will do. I don't see how that compromises the independence of the Fed at all. But it is a fact that if interest rates were to rise too rapidly, that could really have a negative effect on the economy. So what we have to rely on is that the Fed will be moderate in its judgment and will not jump the gun, will not raise rates precipitously. There's no need to do that. The inflation thus far is relatively modest. There's no need for precipitous action, and I think you saw that in their activity this past week, where they voted, at least for the moment, to keep rates unchanged.
Well, I certainly hope that's the way we're going, but we have a tight labor market, and we want wages to start rising, and but we don't want the Federal Reserve to unnecessarily muck up this economic revitalization of this country. Wilbur Ross, thanks for spending so much time with us. We really appreciate it. Secretary of Commerce, you have a great rest of the day.